My sister thought it was hilarious to seat me next to the portable toilets at her $1 million Atlanta wedding. She handed me a $15,000 bar tab because she believed my simple silk dress meant I was still the family outcast who existed only to serve her needs. She had no idea that her high-profile groom was secretly begging me for a corporate contract just to avoid federal prison. When he finally saw my face among the guests, his crystal whiskey glass shattered on the manicured grass and their entire fake empire came crashing down. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. I escaped their toxicity to build my own legacy, but maintained occasional contact to observe their reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your true worth. Growing up in the affluent circles of Atlanta meant projecting privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling estate, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary and my prison. From a young age, I was the dark-skinned daughter with natural hair who preferred culinary arts over debutante balls and country club politics. The bass from the live band thumped through the lavish gardens of the historic Hawthorne estate. It was supposed to be the premier social event of the Atlanta season. My younger sister Chloe was marrying Julian, a talent manager, who constantly bragged about his elite business connections. I was invited, but my seating assignment made my family position perfectly clear. I was placed at table 28. It was a tiny, wobbly table shoved into the far corner of the lawn, situated exactly between the swinging doors of the catering kitchen and the muddy pathway to the portable restrooms. I was seated with two exhausted photographers and a confused lighting assistant. I sat quietly in my unbranded emerald green silk dress, sipping sparkling water. I watched the elite guests mingle around the massive floral centerpieces at the front tables. Suddenly, the heavy fabric of a custom designer gown brushed against my chair. Chloe stormed over to my hidden corner. Her face was flushed beneath her flawless bridal makeup, and her eyes darted around frantically to ensure none of the high society guests were watching her associate with me. Without a single word of greeting, she slammed a heavy leather check folder directly onto my plate, knocking over my water glass. The liquid spilled across the white tablecloth, but Chloe did not even blink. "Pay this right now," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a mixture of panic and raw rage. I looked down at the receipt. It was a bar tab from the estate catering company for $15,000. I looked back up at my sister, my expression entirely neutral. "Why are you handing me a catering bill at your own wedding, Chloe?" I asked calmly. "Because Julian is dealing with a temporary hold on his accounts," she snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "The bank flagged his card for fraud protection because he has been spending so much on my dream day. The beverage vendors are threatening to pack up the premium champagne and lock the bars if this invoice is not settled in the next 5 minutes. We cannot have a dry wedding." Julian invited major tech investors from Silicon Valley and executives from Lumiere Hospitality. "If the bar closes, we will be a complete laughingstock." I leaned back in my cheap folding chair. "And you came to me, the sister you hid behind the kitchen doors." Chloe scoffed, looking me up and down with deep disgust. She gestured wildly at my natural hair and my simple dress. "You look like the kitchen help anyway, Nia. You always loved the kitchen. Just like when you dropped out of Spelman College to go fry chicken and chop onions at that greasy culinary school. Mom and Dad spent thousands trying to make you look like a proper socialite, and you threw it all away to smell like garlic and frying oil." I kept my hands resting gently in my lap. The irony of her words washed over me. She had no idea what my culinary background had actually built over the last decade. "You have been hoarding money in your little catering business for years," Chloe continued, her tone dripping with undeniable entitlement. "I know you live in a cheap apartment and never buy designer clothes. You owe this family for all the embarrassment you caused us. Pay the tab, then stay hidden in this corner. I do not want Julian's high-profile guests seeing you. Your whole aesthetic is completely off-brand for my Black Excellence wedding." Her words were designed to cut deep. They were the exact same words my mother used when she refused to let me stand in family photos because my skin was too dark and my hair was too coiled for her liking. They always viewed me as a blemish on their perfectly curated image. But I was no longer the insecure 20-year-old girl who cried when her family mocked her passions. I was a woman who commanded boardrooms and controlled international supply chains. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply opened my clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy matte black metal card. It was an exclusive invite-only Centurion card from American Express, a card that required a massive annual spending minimum just to hold in your hand. I placed it perfectly in the center of the leather folder. Chloe stared at the black metal, her perfectly arched eyebrows furrowed in deep confusion. "Did you steal a client credit card?" she whispered harshly. I ignored her entirely. I raised my hand and caught the attention of the catering manager, a stressed-looking man in a sharp suit who had been hovering nervously near the kitchen doors. He rushed over immediately, his eyes glued to the black card sitting on the table. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" the manager asked, completely ignoring the furious bride standing next to me. I tapped the metal card. "Charge this for the $15,000 outstanding balance," I instructed clearly. "In fact, charge it for $20,000 to include a generous tip for your hardworking staff. I am officially purchasing every single bottle of premium champagne you currently have on site for this event." Chloe let out a massive sigh of relief. A smug, triumphant smile spread across her face. "See," she mocked. "I knew you were good for something. Now tell them to take the bottles to the VIP tables immediately. Julian's investors are waiting and they expect the best." I looked at the catering manager and smiled warmly. "Actually, I own these bottles now, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," the manager replied, holding my card with extreme reverence. "They are entirely your property to distribute as you see fit." "Excellent," I said, standing up from my chair and smoothing down my silk skirt. "I want you to instruct your staff to bring every single bottle of that premium champagne out to the lawn. Then I want them to uncork every bottle and pour the contents directly down the storm drain by the portable toilets." The catering manager's jaw dropped open. He looked from me to the bride, utterly speechless. Chloe gasped, her eyes bulging out of her head as if I had just slapped her across the face. "You cannot do that," she shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute panic. "You are ruining my wedding. I already paid for it, Chloe," I replied softly. "It is my champagne, and I think it belongs in the sewer right next to your brand." Chloe screamed in horror as the catering staff actually began wheeling carts of expensive champagne toward the drainage grates, following my direct financial orders. She lunged forward, raising her hand to physically attack me, but before her hand could strike my face, a heavy grip clamped down on her wrist. Our parents, Harrison and Camille, stormed over from the VIP section, their faces red with absolute unadulterated rage. My mother reached my table before anyone else could even process what was happening with the catering staff. Camille wore a furious grimace that contorted her usually perfectly lifted features. Without a shred of maternal hesitation, she reached out and grabbed my bare arm. Her long French manicured acrylic nails dug so deeply into my skin that I could feel them breaking the surface. She did not care if she drew blood. She only cared about her pristine public image. "What in the world is wrong with you, Nia?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper designed to carry only to my ears, and not to the wealthy investors seated several yards away. "Are you entirely incapable of acting like a civilized human being for one single evening? You are embarrassing this family again, just like you always do." I looked down at her manicured hand gripping my arm, then back up at her furious eyes. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her with a chilling emptiness that made her falter for a fraction of a second. "You have always been a deeply selfish girl," Camille continued, tightening her grip to regain her sense of control. "You lived to ruin your sister. You are doing exactly what you did at Chloe's debutante cotillion years ago. We spent thousands of dollars organizing that society presentation, and you humiliated us by refusing to straighten your hair. You paraded around the country club with your natural curls looking like a complete militant rebel, while Chloe tried to look like a proper young lady. You ruined her night then, and you are trying to ruin her wedding now because you are miserably jealous." My father Harrison stepped up right behind her. He adjusted his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket, puffing out his chest to project the ultimate image of Atlanta black excellence. He pointed a heavy gold-ringed finger directly at my face. "You need to leave this property immediately," Harrison ordered, his voice thick with absolute authority. "Get up and walk out the back gate right now. Julian has incredibly important corporate networking to do tonight. He is entertaining Silicon Valley venture capitalists and real estate magnates. I will not have my bitter, struggling daughter creating a ghetto spectacle and ruining my son-in-law's multi-million-dollar business opportunities. Get out before I call security to drag you out." I slowly reached over with my free hand and pried my mother's acrylic nails off my arm, bending her fingers back just enough to make her gasp and release her grip. I stood up, smoothing the emerald silk of my dress. I was nearly 3 inches taller than my father in my heels, and I used every bit of that height to look down at him. "Julian's multi-million-dollar business opportunities," I repeated, letting a cold, mocking laugh escape my lips. "You really believe that flashy talent manager is sitting on a gold mine, do you?" Harrison puffed his chest out even further, entirely confident in his delusion. "Julian is a titan in the food and beverage investment industry," he boasted loudly, completely unaware of how foolish he sounded. "He has immense capital flowing through his talent agency. In fact, Julian is about to sign a master franchise contract with a massive hospitality conglomerate by the end of this month. When that deal closes, he is going to pay off every single one of our family debts. He is elevating the entire family name while you are still playing with pots and pans in a greasy kitchen. You are nothing compared to him." I let out a harsh, echoing laugh that cut through the humid evening air. The sheer absurdity of his misplaced arrogance was almost too delicious to interrupt, but I had no intention of letting them live in their comfortable fantasy for another second. "Hi is going to pay off your debts?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure, concentrated sarcasm. "That is a fascinating financial strategy, Dad. Tell me, how exactly is a man who cannot even afford his own wedding reception going to rescue you from your decades of severe financial mismanagement?" Harrison's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do not speak about things you cannot possibly comprehend, Nia. Julian is a wealthy man. He is saving this family." I reached into my emerald clutch again and pulled out my smartphone. I calmly unlocked the screen, navigated to my secure corporate email application, and opened a highly confidential financial report I had received from my legal team just that morning. I turned the brightness all the way up and shoved the glowing screen directly into my father's face. "Read it, Harrison," I commanded, dropping the title of Dad completely. "Read the asset seizure report." Harrison squinted at the bright screen, his eyes scanning the official bank letterhead and the bold red text, highlighting several heavily overdue accounts. His confident posture began to physically deflate as he read the numbers. "You told everyone your prized vintage Porsche was in the shop getting a custom paint job," I said, making sure my mother and Chloe could hear every single word. "But this report confirms your vehicle was legally repossessed from your country club parking lot yesterday afternoon. You defaulted on the title loan 3 months ago." Camille gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest. "Harrison, what is she talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking with sudden panic. "Oh, do not act shocked, Camille." I pivoted my attention smoothly to my mother. "You are not exactly innocent here. The country club did not lose your membership renewal paperwork in the mail like you have been telling your bridge club friends. The board of directors permanently revoked your family membership last Tuesday because your account is over $40,000 in arrears. You have been signing for expensive lunches and spa treatments for an entire year without paying a single dime. You are broke. Both of you are entirely, completely, and utterly broke." Chloe shoved her way between our parents, her face twisted in a desperate, ugly snarl. "Stop lying, Nia," she shrieked, waving her arms. "You hacked a database or paid someone to forge those emails. Julian is rich. He paid for this entire historic estate. He bought my designer ring. He is giving me the life I deserve. Julian is not saving anybody." "Chloe." I dropped the ultimate localized bombshell, watching her eyes widen in terror. "Julian is just as broke as our parents. Did you know the catering and venue deposits for this wedding bounced twice last month? The only reason you are standing here is because he took out a predatory high-interest loan from a shadow lender. And that custom Vera Wang wedding dress you are wearing right now, it is a 72-hour rental secured on a maxed-out credit card. If you spill a single drop of wine on it, you will be paying it off for the next 10 years. Camille let out a strangled gasp, clutching her expensive pearl necklace, as if the jewelry might suddenly vanish into thin air. She looked wildly from my phone to her husband, searching for any sign that I was lying. But Harrison could not meet her eyes. He stared firmly at the grass, his silence serving as the most damning confession possible. "No," Chloe chanted, shaking her head aggressively, her bridal curls bouncing around her shoulders. "No, no, no. Julian has investors. He has million-dollar deals. You are just a jealous, hateful liar." Before I could present the next piece of evidence to shatter her fragile reality, a booming, angry voice interrupted us from across the lawn. "What the hell is going on over here?" We all turned our heads. Julian was marching aggressively toward us. He was flanked by his groomsmen, walking with the swagger of men who believed they owned the entire city of Atlanta. His expensive tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, and he gripped a crystal whiskey glass tightly in his right hand. He had clearly noticed the catering staff pouring the premium champagne down the drain and had come to assert his dominance over the situation. "I told the catering staff to keep the cheap guests quiet," Julian barked loudly, completely unaware of the absolute nightmare he was walking into. "Who is causing a scene in the cheap seats during my networking event?" Chloe immediately ran toward him, her face stained with fresh tears of panic and rage. "Julian, tell her she is lying," Chloe cried, pointing a trembling manicured finger back at me. "Tell my jealous, psychotic sister that you are rich. Tell her about the massive corporate contract you are signing." Julian sneered, his chest puffed out with total arrogance as he stepped around his bride to confront the unruly guest. He prepared to unleash a barrage of verbal insults to put the broke sister in her place. He looked past my parents. He looked past the remaining catering staff. And finally, his eyes landed directly on my face. Julian took another heavy step forward, his expensive Italian leather shoes crunching aggressively against the gravel path. He stood tall, projecting the ultimate image of a wealthy, untouchable industry mogul. His custom-tailored tuxedo fit him perfectly, and the diamond-studded watch on his wrist caught the ambient light from the overhead string bulbs. He looked down his nose at me with a level of pure, unadulterated disdain that perfectly matched my sister's usual expression. He had clearly heard all the terrible fabricated stories my family had told him about the broke, rebellious sister who refused to conform to their high society standards. "You must be Nia," Julian spat, his voice loud enough to turn the heads of the caterers and a few nearby guests. "Chloe warned me that you might try to pull some pathetic stunt tonight, but I honestly did not believe even you could be this desperate for attention. You are creating a massive scene in the middle of my luxury networking event. I have Silicon Valley venture capitalists and top-tier real estate magnates sitting less than 50 feet away from here. Men who manage billions of dollars in elite assets. And here you are, dressed like a budget caterer, harassing my staff and upsetting my beautiful bride." I did not flinch. I remained perfectly seated, my posture straight, my hands resting lightly in my lap. I let him speak. I wanted him to empty his entire arsenal of arrogance before I systematically dismantled his entire life. "Do you have any idea how much money is flowing through this historic estate tonight?" Julian demanded, taking another intimidating step toward my small, wobbly table. "I am building a global food and beverage empire. My talent agency represents the highest-earning chefs and hospitality influencers in the country. I am currently in the final stages of securing a master franchise contract with the most powerful culinary corporation in North America. This wedding is a showcase of my wealth, my power, and my brand. And you sitting here with your natural hair and your cheap silk dress are a massive liability to everything I have built. You do not belong in our world. You are a stain on the black excellence image I am projecting to my corporate investors tonight." Harrison and Camille nodded vigorously behind him, their chests puffed out with pride as their wealthy son-in-law put me in my place. Chloe stood at his side, a smug, vindictive smile plastered across her face. She clearly felt invincible with Julian defending her honor. "If you do not get up, walk out those back gates and disappear into the night right now," Julian threatened, pointing his crystal whiskey glass directly at my face. "I am going to call my private armed security team. I will have them physically drag you off this property and throw you onto the street where you belong. Do not test me, Nia. I have the money and the power to destroy your sad little life. I will make sure you never find work in any kitchen in this city again. I took a deep breath, clearly expecting me to cower in fear, to burst into tears, or to run away exactly as my family always expected me to do. He waited for my total submission. I maintained absolute eye contact with him. My expression was an unreadable mask of calm, cold calculation. The sheer audacity of his threats was almost poetic. I slowly stood up from my folding chair, rising to my full height, making sure the dim lighting of the garden finally illuminated my face completely. I turned my body to face him, directly removing the shadows that had previously obscured my features. The ambient light from the nearby tiki torches washed over my face. I looked Julian dead in the eyes, offering him a sharp, knowing, and utterly terrifying smile. The transformation in Julian was immediate and violently visceral. The transition from supreme, untouchable arrogance to absolute paralyzing terror happened in the span of a single heartbeat. The smug, confident smirk that had been plastered across his face melted away, as if exposed to a direct blowtorch. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving his dark skin looking ash-gray and sickly. His eyes widened to an impossible size, bulging out of his head as his pupils dilated in pure, unadulterated panic. His breathing hitched in his throat, creating a strange choking sound that made Chloe glance at him in sudden confusion. Julian's entire body began to tremble. It started as a small shake in his hands and rapidly spread through his broad shoulders down to his legs. The heavy, expensive crystal whiskey glass he had been using to threaten me just seconds ago slipped straight through his numb, paralyzed fingers. The glass hit the hard stone border separating the grass from the pathway. It shattered with a loud, violent crash, sending sharp shards of crystal and expensive brown liquor exploding across the manicured lawn. The sharp sound of this breaking glass cut through the smooth rhythm and blues music playing in the background, drawing the attention of several high-profile guests at the nearby tables. But Julian did not even notice the shattered glass at his feet. He could not look away from my eyes, his knees physically buckled under his weight. He staggered backward, stumbling clumsily in his expensive Italian shoes, as if he had just taken a physical bullet to the chest. He bumped heavily into Harrison, who had to brace himself to keep from falling over. Julian, Chloe asked, her voice high-pitched and laced with sudden rising panic. Julian, baby, what is wrong? Why are you shaking? Are you having a medical emergency? Call a doctor? Julian could not answer her. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly like a fish suffocating on dry land, but no sound came out. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving up and down in his custom tuxedo. The man who had just proudly threatened to destroy my life and banish me from the culinary world was currently experiencing a full-blown debilitating panic attack right in the middle of his own luxury wedding reception. He recognized me. He recognized the facial structure, the calm demeanor, and the piercing gaze of the woman he had spent the last 6 months aggressively pursuing through countless corporate emails, desperate phone calls, and high-stakes virtual board meetings. He recognized the woman who held the absolute power of life and death over his failing talent agency. I took one slow, deliberate step toward him, my heels sinking slightly into the grass. The sheer magnitude of his horrific mistake was actively crushing his spirit in real time. He realized that the broke, pathetic sister he had just ruthlessly humiliated was the very architect of the empire he was trying to infiltrate. Julian raised a trembling, sweaty hand, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Madam CEO," he stammered, his voice cracking and breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "Nia. You are Nia, you are the founder." Harrison frowned deeply, stepping forward to intervene. "What are you talking about, Julian? Why are you calling her Madam CEO? She is just a cook. She runs a struggling catering business out of a dirty apartment. She is a total failure. Stop acting so crazy and call the security guards to throw her out like you promised." Camille nodded aggressively, grabbing Julian's arm to steady him. "Yes, Julian, handle this right now. People are staring at us. You are embarrassing your investors." Julian violently ripped his arm away from Camille's grasp, staring at his new mother-in-law with a look of absolute, untethered horror. "Shut up!" Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing across the lawn and completely silencing the live band. "Shut your ignorant mouths. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? Do you have any idea what you have done to me? Chloe grabbed his shoulders, her acrylic nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. Julian, you are scaring me, she cried, her perfect facade crumbling rapidly. Who cares who she is? She is my loser sister. She is not a loser! Chloe Julian shrieked, his voice echoing with raw, unadulterated desperation. That woman standing right there is the anonymous culinary billionaire I have been begging for a master franchise contract for the last 6 months. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Lumiere Hospitality. She is the only person on this entire planet who can save my agency from total bankruptcy. That is Nia. The absolute bewilderment that crashed over the faces of my family members was a masterpiece of human emotion. Chloe's jaw unhinged, dropping completely open. Camille let out a short, wheezing gasp, clutching her pearls so hard the strings snapped, sending expensive white beads scattering onto the grass alongside the broken crystal glass. Harrison looked as though he had just been struck by lightning, his eyes darting frantically between my calm face and Julian's terrified expression. Without Lumiere, hospitality, my agency is dead. Julian confessed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, hysterical sob as he spoke to my paralyzed family. I need her corporate signature to secure my funding. I need her approval to avoid defaulting on my massive business loans. I have spent half a year trying to impress her board of directors, and you idiots told me she was a broke, unemployed caterer. You completely set me up to insult the most powerful woman in the hospitality industry. Chloe furiously grabbed Julian by the collar of his tuxedo, shaking him with wild, unrestrained anger. You are delusional. Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she refused to accept the reality of the situation. She is lying to you. Nia is just a cheap cook. She does not have any money. She does not own a corporate empire. Stop ruining our perfect wedding day and act like a man. Julian violently shoved Chloe's hands off his chest, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He turned away from his screaming, frantic bride and literally dropped to his knees on the damp, manicured grass, completely ruining his expensive designer pants. He clasped his hands together in front of his chest, staring up at me with hot tears streaming down his ashen face. He looked nothing like the powerful talent manager who had strutted over here moments ago. He was a broken, desperate man facing the complete annihilation of his entire financial existence. He ignored the hundreds of shocked guests watching him from the VIP section. He ignored his crying wife and my stunned parents. He focused entirely on me, sobbing loudly as he began frantically begging me not to cancel our highly anticipated corporate contract meeting, pleading for his professional life. Julian completely ignored the hundreds of elite guests watching him from the VIP section. He ignored his crying wife and my stunned parents. He dropped to his knees on the damp, manicured grass, ruining his designer pants, and focused entirely on me. He was sobbing loudly, frantically begging me not to cancel our highly anticipated corporate contract meeting, pleading for his professional life. Madam CEO, please, you have to listen to me, Julian wailed, grasping his hands together in a pathetic display of supplication. You cannot cancel the master franchise contract with Lumiere Hospitality. If you pull out now, my entire talent agency will collapse by Friday. I am completely underwater. I have massive business loans coming due, and my creditors are threatening to seize every asset I own. Your contract is the only thing keeping my agency alive. Please, Nia, I am begging you. I did not know who you were. Chloe let out a piercing shriek, completely unable to process the reality of the situation. You are lying, Chloe screamed at Julian, her face contorted in absolute denial. She is just a cook. She runs a cheap little catering business out of her apartment. She must have hacked a corporate database or scammed someone to steal that black card. She is a fraud. Do not beg her, Julian. Tell security to throw her out. I looked down at Julian, my expression remaining completely cold and calculating. I did not offer him an ounce of sympathy. I pieced the puzzle together out loud, making sure my voice carried clearly over the rising murmurs of the confused wedding guests. You needed my franchise contract to show liquidity to your creditors, I stated, analyzing his desperate situation. You needed the Lumiere Hospitality brand name to secure another round of funding, because you currently have absolutely zero capital. You are completely broke, Julian. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment before dropping the next bombshell. So if your talent agency is bankrupt, and your accounts are flagged for insufficient funds. How exactly did you pay for a $200,000 wedding at this historic Atlanta estate? How did you pay for the custom floral arrangements, the live rhythm and blues band, and the premium champagne you were just trying to make me pay for? Julian flinched as if I had struck him. He looked wildly around the garden, his eyes darting towards the VIP tables where his top-tier clients were seated. He was visibly sweating now, his custom tuxedo clinging to his damp skin. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Answer the question." "Julian," I commanded, stepping closer to him, my presence casting a long shadow over his kneeling form. "How did a bankrupt talent manager fund an extravagant Black excellence wedding facade? Where did the money come from?" Chloe grabbed Julian's shoulder, her acrylic nails digging into his jacket. "Tell her, Julian. Tell her you earned it. Tell her about your successful investments." Under the intense, intimidating pressure of my gaze and the sheer weight of his own collapsing lies, Julian finally cracked. He could not maintain the facade any longer. The truth spilled out of him in a desperate, frantic rush. "I took it," Julian confessed, his voice breaking into a harsh sob. "I took the money from the client escrow accounts. I embezzled the funds." Camille gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Harrison stumbled backward, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Chloe froze, her hands slowly dropping from Julian's shoulders. "You did what?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own shattering reality. "I needed to project success, Chloe," Julian yelled, turning his tear-stained face toward his bride. "I needed to show the executives at Lumiere Hospitality that I was a major player in the Atlanta elite. I needed this extravagant wedding to prove my brand's value. So I quietly transferred funds from the investment portfolios of my top VIP clients. I thought I could use their money to fund the wedding impress, the Lumiere board of directors win the franchise contract, and then quietly pay the money back before anyone noticed the missing funds. It was supposed to be a temporary loan." I looked down at him in pure disgust. "You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from your own clients to throw a fake luxury wedding, hoping to trick my company into bailing you out of your debt," I asked, confirming the absolute insanity of his plan. "Yes," Julian sobbed, bowing his head toward the grass. "Yes, I did it. But I can fix it, Nia. I can fix everything if you just sign the contract. Please, you have to save me. If my clients find out about the missing money, I am going to federal prison." I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single perfectly manicured finger directly toward Table 1, the most prominent VIP table situated right near the dance floor. "That is a truly fascinating business strategy, Julian," I said, my voice carrying a sharp, dangerous edge. "But I wonder how your VIP clients feel about unknowingly funding this spectacular party." Julian froze. He slowly turned his head, following the direction of my pointed finger. The camera perspective shifted. The ambient lighting of the garden illuminated the space directly behind Julian. Standing less than 10 feet away, listening to every single word of his frantic, tearful confession, were two of his biggest, most lucrative talent agency clients. One was a prominent Atlanta professional athlete, and the other was a highly successful tech investor. They had walked over from the VIP section when they heard the initial commotion, arriving just in time to hear their trusted manager admit to embezzling their investment portfolios to pay for his wedding. The athlete, a towering man in a custom-tailored suit, crossed his arms over his broad chest. His expression was a terrifying mask of silent, simmering rage. The tech investor stood next to him, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. They did not look like men who were willing to forgive a temporary loan. Julian let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. He tried to scramble backward on his hands and knees, scrambling away from the furious clients he had just betrayed. The athlete stepped forward, his heavy footsteps thudding against the grass. "You took our money to pay for this fake setup?" the athlete asked, his voice low and dangerous, rumbling with the promise of immediate severe consequences. "You stole from our families to buy champagne and floral arrangements." Julian held his hands up defensively, tears streaming down his face. "I can explain," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I was going to pay it all back. I swear I was going to pay it back." The tech investor pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket. I am calling the authorities right now. Now, he stated coldly. His eyes locked on Julian's terrified face. We are auditing every single account you manage. You are going to prison for a very long time, Julian. The sheer reality of the situation finally hit the surrounding guests. The murmurs of confusion erupted into loud gasps and shocked conversations. The elite attendees realized they were sitting in the middle of a massive financial crime scene. The entire wedding reception ground to a complete dead halt. The live rhythm and blues band abruptly stopped playing, the musicians lowering their instruments in stunned silence. Chloe, desperate to save her crumbling socialite image, frantically grabbed a microphone from the nearby DJ booth. She marched to the center of the lawn, her bridal gown swishing violently around her legs. She tried to publicly gaslight the entire crowd, forcing a hysterical, high-pitched laugh that sounded completely unhinged. "Attention, everyone!" Chloe shouted into the microphone, her voice echoing across the silent estate. "Please do not be alarmed. This is all just a prank. A terrible, tasteless prank orchestrated by my jealous, mentally unstable sister. She is just trying to ruin my special day because she has always been deeply envious of my success. Julian is a wealthy, honest man. Please return to your seats and ignore her. The catering staff will continue serving the premium champagne shortly." The guests did not move. They stared at Chloe with expressions ranging from deep pity to outright disgust. The athlete and the tech investor did not back away from Julian. The illusion was completely shattered, and no amount of frantic gaslighting could put it back together. When the guests completely ignored her desperate commands, Chloe entirely lost her mind. She dropped the facade of the elegant high-class bride and morphed into a chaotic, screaming tyrant. She turned toward the estate's private security team, who were standing nervously by the main gates. "Security!" Chloe shrieked into the microphone, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. "I want that woman removed from my wedding right now. She is trespassing and harassing my guests. Drag her out of here immediately." The head of the private security team, a tall, imposing man in a sharp black suit, walked slowly toward our group. He did not look angry. He looked entirely professional and completely calm. He stopped a few feet away, assessing the chaotic scene. He looked down at Julian, who was still cowering on the grass. He looked at Chloe, who was hyperventilating into the microphone. And then he turned his attention entirely to me. He did not reach for his radio. He did not attempt to grab my arm. Instead, he stepped forward, bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect, and spoke directly to me. "Awaiting your orders, boss." The heavy silence that fell over the manicured lawn of the Hawthorne estate was deafening. The words spoken by the imposing head of security hung in the humid Atlanta air, echoing against the historic brick walls of the main mansion. "Awaiting your orders, boss." Chloe blinked rapidly, her flawless bridal makeup unable to hide the violent twitch developing in her left eye. She stared at the tall, broad-shouldered security professional as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "What did you just say?" Chloe demanded, her voice cracking into a shrill, unhinged pitch. She pointed a trembling finger wrapped in expensive diamond rings at his chest. "Why are you calling her boss? She is a caterer. She is my broke, jealous sister. I am the bride. My husband paid for your services. I order you to grab her by the arms and physically throw her out of those iron gates immediately. If you do not touch her right now, I will have your entire company blacklisted from every high society event in this city. You will never work in luxury security again." The head of security, a man named Marcus, whose military background made him completely immune to the hysterical demands of spoiled socialites, did not even flinch. He did not look at Chloe. He kept his eyes fixed respectfully on me, maintaining his perfectly straight posture. His hands remained folded behind his back. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute professional finality, "my security firm does not work for your husband. We are exclusively contracted by the Property Management Division of Lumiere Hospitality. We report directly to the Chief Executive Officer." He gestured subtly toward me. "And the CEO has not instructed me to remove anyone yet." Chloe staggered backward, the heavy layers of her rented Vera Wang wedding dress tangling around her ankles. She looked wildly from Marcus to Julian, who was still kneeling on the damp grass, completely paralyzed by the looming threat of federal prison. Julian would not meet her eyes. He kept his face buried in his hands, quietly sobbing, as the wealthy investors he had defrauded stood over him like executioners waiting to strike. I stepped forward, my emerald green silk dress gliding smoothly over the grass. I approached my sister, who was hyperventilating, desperately trying to maintain her grip on the microphone she had snatched from the DJ booth moments earlier. She clutched it to her chest like a life preserver, but she was already drowning in the reality of her own collapsing lies. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and firmly wrapped my hand around the microphone. Chloe resisted for a fraction of a second, her acrylic nails digging into the black plastic, but the sheer, overwhelming terror in her eyes betrayed her. She surrendered the microphone, her hands shaking violently. I turned to face the crowd of 300 elite guests. These were the most powerful politicians, real estate developers, and socialites in Atlanta. They had come to celebrate a union built on the ultimate facade of generational wealth and Black excellence. Now they were serving as the ultimate jury. "Marcus," I said calmly into the microphone, my voice ringing out with crystal clear authority across the sprawling garden. "Please bring me the primary property portfolio from the main office safe." "Right away, boss," Marcus replied. He spoke quickly into his earpiece, and within seconds another sharply dressed security guard jogged across the lawn, carrying a thick leather-bound legal folio stamped with the Lumiere Hospitality gold crest. He handed it directly to me. I opened the heavy cover, feeling the satisfying weight of the thick watermarked legal parchment inside. "Chloe loved to brag about this venue," I announced to the captivated audience, my gaze sweeping across the sea of shocked faces. "For the last 6 months, she has told everyone in her country club circles that Julian rented the historic Hawthorne estate for a staggering $100,000. She boasted that securing this exclusive private property proved they were at the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society." I pulled the crisp, notarized deed from the leather folio and held it up high for the entire crowd to see. The estate lighting caught the gold foil seals stamped at the bottom of the page. "What she did not know," I continued, my voice steady and commanding, "is that this historic estate was quietly purchased by a corporate LLC exactly 6 months ago. The property was completely renovated, staffed, and secured by a private corporate entity. That entity is Lumiere Hospitality." I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the weight of my words. I looked directly at my parents, Harrison and Camille, who were standing frozen near the front row of white folding chairs. Their faces were completely drained of color, their arrogant country club personas thoroughly shattered. "I am the founder and sole owner of Lumiere Hospitality," I stated clearly, "which means I am the sole legal owner of the Hawthorne estate. The very ground you are standing on belongs to me. I am the landlord." A collective audible gasp rippled through the crowd. The wealthy tech investor who had just confronted Julian over the embezzled funds let out a low, impressed whistle, crossing his arms and watching the scene unfold with deep fascination. Chloe let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, clutching her stomach as if she were going to be physically sick. Earlier this evening, I addressed the crowd again, my tone shifting from corporate authority to cold, calculated retribution. My sister handed me a $15,000 catering bill. She ordered me to pay it because her groom's credit cards were declining. She then deliberately seated me at table 28, shoving me into a dark corner by the portable restrooms. She told me to stay hidden because my natural hair, my unbranded dress, and my very existence did not fit the pristine elite aesthetic she wanted to project to all of you. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Chloe. She shrank away from me, her bridal tiara slipping askew on her head. She told me I did not belong in her world. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "But as the legal owner of this property, I make the final decisions about what fits the aesthetic of my estate. And I have decided that fraud, embezzlement, and toxic entitlement do not fit my brand." I turned to Marcus, who was standing at attention, ready to execute my commands. "Marcus," I said into the microphone, "I am officially canceling this event. Please instruct the catering team to pack up their equipment immediately. Then I want you and your security team to escort the Adams family and the groom off my property. They have exactly 10 minutes to clear the gates before I have them arrested for criminal trespassing." Absolute chaos instantly erupted across the manicured lawn. The elite guests began murmuring excitedly, pulling out their expensive smartphones to text their friends and record the unprecedented spectacle unfolding before them. The facade of the perfect high-class society wedding had completely evaporated, replaced by a brutal, deeply satisfying reality check. Harrison suddenly collapsed into a white folding chair, gripping his chest, as he realized his daughter was not only a billionaire, but the very woman evicting him from the most prestigious event of the year. Julian remained curled in a pathetic ball on the grass, rocking back and forth, as the tech investors called their legal teams to initiate immediate fraud investigations. Chloe fell to her knees, the heavy tulle of her rented dress soaking up the spilled water and mud from the lawn. She buried her face in her hands, letting out loud, racking sobs that completely destroyed her carefully applied bridal makeup. Her dream of becoming an elite Atlanta socialite had just been violently crushed under the heel of the sister she had relentlessly bullied for decades. Marcus and his security team moved forward swiftly, their faces grim and professional. They began actively directing the shocked guests toward the valet parking area, efficiently clearing the estate lawn. The catering staff, having heard my direct orders, instantly dropped their serving trays and began wheeling the massive warming ovens and liquor carts back toward the kitchen loading docks. Just as two broad-shouldered security guards approached Julian to physically lift him off the grass and escort him to the exit, a sudden piercing shriek tore through the humid night air. Camille, my mother, completely snapped. The sudden irreversible destruction of her entire social standing and the public humiliation of her golden child pushed her over the edge of sanity. She charged through the dispersing crowd like a raging bull, her expensive silk shawl falling carelessly into the dirt. Her eyes were wide, wild, and blazing with a toxic, desperate fury. She lunged directly at me, her hands outstretched forcefully, snatching the microphone right out of my grip before I could step back. The speakers let out a loud, painful screech of feedback that made several guests cover their ears. "You think you have won!" Camille screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing violently across the estate, dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you can humiliate us and just walk away? I am going to tell everyone the real truth about you. Nia, I am going to tell them exactly how you stole everything you have." She turned to face the remaining guests, preparing to drop a devastating fabricated family secret designed to completely destroy my credibility and ruin my corporate empire. The absolute silence that paralyzed the sprawling lawn of the Hawthorne estate felt heavy enough to suffocate everyone present. The words spoken by the towering head of security hung suspended in the thick Atlanta humidity, vibrating against the historic brick walls of the grand mansion. Chloe blinked rapidly, her flawless bridal makeup failing to mask the violent twitch developing in her left eye. She stared at the security professional as if he had spoken an alien language. "What did you just say to her?" Chloe demanded, her voice cracking into a shrill pitch that echoed across the garden. She pointed a trembling finger wrapped in unpaid diamond rings directly at his chest. "Why are you calling her boss? She is a lowly caterer. She is my broke, jealous sister. I am the bride. This is my wedding day. My husband paid a fortune for your services. I order you to grab her by the arms and physically throw her out of those iron gates immediately. If you do not put your hands on her right now, I will personally see to it your entire company is blacklisted from every high society event in this city. You will never work in luxury security again." The head of security, a man whose extensive military background made him immune to the hysterical demands of spoiled socialites, did not even flinch at her screeching. He did not look at Chloe. He kept his dark eyes fixed very respectfully directly on me, maintaining his perfectly straight posture. His large hands remained folded neatly behind his back. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute professional finality, "my security firm does not work for your husband. We are exclusively contracted by the Property Management Division of Lumiere Hospitality. We report directly to the Chief Executive Officer." He gestured subtly toward me with a slight nod. "And the CEO has not instructed me to remove anyone from the premises yet." Chloe staggered backward, the heavy layers of her rented Vera Wang wedding dress tangling awkwardly around her ankles. She looked wildly from him to Julian, who was still kneeling helplessly on the damp grass, completely paralyzed by the looming threat of federal prison. Julian would not meet her eyes. He kept his face buried deep in his hands, quietly sobbing, as the wealthy investors he had defrauded stood over him like executioners waiting to strike. I stepped forward, my emerald green silk dress gliding smoothly over the pristine grass. I approached my younger sister, who was actively hyperventilating, desperately trying to maintain her slipping grip on the microphone she had snatched from the DJ booth moments earlier. She clutched the black plastic to her chest like a life preserver, but she was already drowning in the terrifying reality of her own collapsing lies. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and firmly wrapped my hand around the microphone. Chloe resisted for a fraction of a second, her acrylic nails digging into my skin, but the sheer terror in her eyes betrayed her bravado. She surrendered the microphone, her hands shaking violently at her sides. I turned to directly face the captive crowd of 300 elite guests. These were the most powerful politicians, real estate developers, and socialites in Atlanta. They had all come to celebrate a union built on the ultimate facade of generational wealth and Black excellence. Now they were serving as the ultimate jury. "Marcus," I said calmly into the microphone, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear authority across the sprawling garden. "Please bring me the primary property portfolio from the main office safe inside the mansion." "Right away," Boss Marcus replied instantly. He spoke into his secure earpiece, and within seconds, another sharply dressed security guard jogged purposefully across the lawn. The guard carried a thick leather-bound legal folio stamped prominently with the Lumiere Hospitality gold crest. He handed it directly to me with a respectful bow. I opened the heavy cover, feeling the satisfying, undeniable weight of the thick, watermarked legal parchment inside. Chloe loved to brag about this particular venue, I announced to the captivated audience, my gaze sweeping deliberately across the sea of shocked faces. For the last 6 months, she has told everyone in her exclusive country club circles that Julian rented the historic Hawthorne estate for a staggering $100,000. She boasted to her sorority sisters and her social media followers that securing this exclusive private property proved they were at the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. She claimed this location was a testament to her husband's limitless financial power. I pulled the crisp, notarized deed from the leather folio and held it up high for the entire crowd to see. The warm, ambient estate lighting caught the shiny gold foil seals stamped firmly at the bottom of the page, proving its absolute legal authenticity. What she did not know, I continued, my voice steady and commanding, is that this historic estate was quietly purchased by a corporate LLC exactly 6 months ago. The property was completely renovated, fully staffed, and heavily secured by a private corporate entity. That entity is Lumiere Hospitality. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence amplify the profound weight of my words. I looked directly at my parents, Harrison and Camille, who were standing completely frozen near the front row of white folding chairs. Their faces were completely drained of color, their arrogant country club personas thoroughly shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "I am the founder and sole owner of Lumiere Hospitality," I stated clearly, ensuring every single syllable echoed perfectly through the high-quality sound system. "Which means I am the sole legal owner of the Hawthorne estate. The very ground you are standing on belongs to me. I am the landlord." A collective, highly audible gasp rippled rapidly through the massive crowd. The wealthy tech investor who had just confronted Julian over the embezzled funds let out a low, incredibly impressed whistle, crossing his arms and watching the dramatic scene unfold with deep, undisguised fascination. Chloe let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, clutching her stomach tightly, as if she were going to be physically sick right there on the grass. Earlier this evening, I addressed the bewildered crowd once again, my tone shifting smoothly from corporate authority to cold, calculated retribution. My sister proudly handed me a $15,000 catering bill. She aggressively ordered me to pay it because her groom's credit cards were declining. She then deliberately seated me at table 28, intentionally shoving me into a dark, undesirable corner by the portable restrooms and the kitchen doors. She loudly proclaimed to my face that I had to stay hidden because my natural hair, my unbranded dress, and my very existence simply did not fit the pristine elite aesthetic she wanted to project to all of you tonight. I took one slow, deliberate step toward Chloe. She shrank away from me in sheer terror, her expensive bridal tiara slipping askew on her head, making her look entirely ridiculous. She told me I did not belong in her elevated world, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that sent shivers down the spines of the closest guests. But as the legal owner of this beautiful property, I make the final decisions about what fits the aesthetic of my estate. And I have decided that gross financial fraud, blatant embezzlement, and toxic familial entitlement absolutely do not fit my brand. I turned to Marcus, who was standing at attention, ready to execute my commands. Marcus, I said into the microphone, my voice firm and unwavering. I am officially canceling this event. Please instruct the catering team to pack up all their expensive equipment immediately. Then I want you and your entire security team to escort the Adams family and the groom completely off my property. They have exactly 10 minutes to clear the gates before I have them arrested for criminal trespassing. Absolute chaos instantly erupted across the manicured lawn. The elite guests began murmuring excitedly, pulling out their expensive smartphones to text their friends and record the unprecedented spectacle unfolding before them. The grand facade of the perfect high-class society wedding had completely evaporated, replaced by a brutal, deeply satisfying reality check. Harrison suddenly collapsed into a white folding chair, gripping his chest tightly as he realized his dark-skinned daughter was not only a self-made billionaire but the very woman forcefully evicting him from the most prestigious social event of the year. Julian remained curled in a pathetic ball on the grass, rocking back and forth, as the tech investors actively called their legal teams to initiate immediate severe fraud investigations. Chloe now fell heavily to her knees, sobbing loudly. As I ordered the florist to pack up, Camille suddenly charged at me, grabbing the microphone desperately, preparing to drop a fabricated family secret to destroy my credibility completely. Camille ripped the microphone from my hand with a vicious, uncalculated strength. Her perfectly manicured acrylic nails dug into my palm, but I let her take it. I stepped back, smoothing my silk dress, allowing my mother enough rope to hang herself in front of the entire Atlanta elite. She spun around to face the dispersing crowd, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a manic, desperate energy. She forced a wet, choking sob from her throat. It was a masterful theatrical display of maternal heartbreak, honed by decades of manipulating country club committees and church boards. "Please listen to me," Camille wailed into the microphone, her voice echoing off the historic brick walls of the estate. "Do not listen to a single word this ungrateful, pathological liar says. Nia is not a brilliant entrepreneur. She is a thief. She is a fraud who built her entire empire on the broken backs of her own struggling parents." The elite guests who had been moving toward the valet gates froze in their tracks. The wealthy tech investors and real estate developers turned back around, captivated by this sudden dramatic escalation. Chloe, still kneeling in the damp grass, looked up at our mother with a sudden spark of malicious hope. "She stole everything from us," Camille cried, pointing a trembling accusatory finger directly at my face. "She claims she built Lumiere Hospitality with her own hands. But that is a complete malicious lie. She stole our sacred generational family recipes. She took the culinary secrets that my ancestors passed down to me, the very recipes I taught her in our family kitchen. She stole our intellectual property, patented it under her corporate umbrella, and completely locked us out of the profits. We sacrificed every single dime we had to support her little cooking dreams, and the moment she made her first million, she abandoned us to rot. She left her own flesh and blood to drown in debt while she bought mansions." A wave of shocked, uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the audience. A few of the older traditional socialites in the crowd began shaking their heads, looking at me with sudden sharp disapproval. In the affluent circles of the South, stealing family legacy was the ultimate unforgivable sin. Camille knew exactly which buttons to push to assassinate my character. She stood there panting heavily, tears streaming down her carefully contoured cheeks, playing the ultimate role of the devoted, betrayed matriarch. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice defensively. I simply looked at her with a profound, icy emptiness. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I caught the eye of the estate DJ who was still standing nervously behind his massive audio mixing board. I gave him a sharp, commanding nod. Because I was the legal owner of the property and his ultimate employer, he instantly understood my silent directive. I walked over to the audio booth, tapped a few buttons on my screen, and wirelessly paired my device directly to the massive stadium-quality concert speakers that surrounded the sprawling green estate lawn. "You have always been a fantastic storyteller, Camille," I said, my unamplified voice carrying clearly through the sudden heavy silence of the garden. "But you always forget that I keep receipts for absolutely everything." I pressed play on my phone screen. A sharp, vicious voice blasted through the towering concert speakers, echoing with deafening clarity across the manicured grass. It was a voicemail from exactly 3 years ago. The voice was unmistakably Camille's, but it completely lacked the weeping, victimized tone she was currently projecting. Instead, the audio revealed her true, unfiltered nature. It was harsh, demanding, and dripping with venomous, toxic entitlement. "Listen to me very carefully, Nia." The recorded voice of my mother spat through the speakers. "If you do not co-sign this massive bank loan for Chloe's luxury high-rise condo, by tomorrow morning you are completely dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead to me. You are a selfish, useless disappointment. You think your little cooking hobby makes you special. It is garbage. Your pathetic little catering business will fail, just like every other stupid idea you have ever had. I will personally make sure you get absolutely nothing from this family. You will never see a single dime of our wealth. Sign the papers for your sister or do not ever show your face at my house again." The voicemail ended with the harsh, aggressive click of a disconnected line. The heavy silence that followed was physically suffocating. The contrast between the weeping, heartbroken mother standing on the grass and the vicious, greedy monster on the audio recording was completely undeniable. The entire crowd stared at Camille in sheer, unadulterated horror. The older socialites who had judged me just moments ago now looked at my mother with open, intense disgust. The sheer cruelty of threatening to disown her own daughter over a luxury condo loan shattered her fake maternal facade into a million irreparable pieces. Camille staggered backward, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The microphone slipped from her trembling hand, dropping onto the soft grass with a dull thud. She looked frantically around the lawn, desperate for a friendly face, but the elite guests were actively recoiling from her. I calmly walked forward and picked up the dropped microphone. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald dress, reclaiming my absolute authority over the entire venue. "A cooking hobby that was destined to fail," I repeated smoothly into the microphone, quoting her own vicious words back to her. "That is what you called my business 3 years ago, when you demanded I take on massive debt to fund Chloe's vanity lifestyle. You threw me away because I refused to be a financial stepping stone for your golden child. You told me I was dead to you. So I took you at your word, Camille. I buried the daughter who desperately craved your approval, and I birthed a CEO who demands absolute respect." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Now let us address your desperate, pathetic accusation regarding the stolen sacred family recipes. You just stood in front of 300 elite guests and claimed, 'I stole your intellectual property,'" I said, my voice ringing out with cold, calculated precision. "You claimed those recipes belonged to you. But we both know that is a complete malicious fabrication. Those recipes never belonged to you, Camille. They belonged to Grandma Josephine." Camille flinched violently at the mention of her late mother. She took another shaky step backward, realizing exactly what I was about to reveal. "Grandma Josephine spent 50 years perfecting those Southern heritage recipes," I explained to the captivated audience. "She taught them to me because I was the only person in this entire family who actually wanted to be in the kitchen with her. You hated cooking. You thought it was beneath your elevated social status. When Grandma Josephine passed away, she left her entire culinary catalog exclusively to me in an ironclad, legally binding trust. She did not leave a single index card to you." I stepped closer, forcing Camille to look me directly in the eyes. "Do you want to tell these people why your own mother cut you out of her culinary will?" I asked sharply. Do you want to tell them, or should I? Camille shook her head frantically, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-stained face. No, she whimpered pathetically. Stop it. I will tell them, I commanded, refusing to grant her an ounce of mercy. Grandma Josephine left those recipes to me because she discovered your secret corporate negotiations. She found out that you were actively trying to sell our sacred generational family recipes to a cheap mass-market fast food chain. You were willing to completely sell out your own mother's legacy for a quick lump sum of cash, just so you could pay off your severely delinquent country club dues. You tried to auction off our heritage to maintain your fake superficial black excellence aesthetic. I did not steal our legacy, Camille. I legally inherited it, and I protected it from you. The gasp from the crowd was simultaneous and deafening. In the elite circles of Atlanta, selling out family heritage to a cheap fast food corporation was a social death sentence. Camille was instantly exposed not just as a cruel, abusive mother, but as a treacherous, greedy fraud who possessed absolutely zero loyalty to her own bloodline. She had tried to ruin my credibility, but had only managed to completely obliterate her own public standing. The crowd immediately erupted into angry, disgusted murmurs. Wealthy investors shook their heads, repulsed by her actions. Seeing his wife publicly humiliated and realizing their social standing in Atlanta was permanently destroyed, Harrison aggressively turned on Camille. The man who enabled her toxicity for decades suddenly morphed into a cornered animal. He violently shoved past Chloe, pointing a furious finger right at his weeping wife's face. He loudly blamed Camille for their financial bankruptcy, screaming that her endless greed ruined his reputation. Harrison prepared to throw his wife under the bus to save himself, completely unaware I was coming for him next. Harrison stood completely paralyzed for a fraction of a second as the collective disgust of the Atlanta elite washed over his weeping wife. The man who had spent his entire adult life carefully curating an image of flawless patriarchal authority suddenly realized his social empire was burning to ash. Instead of standing by the woman who had just humiliated herself to protect their fake legacy, Harrison made the ultimate cowardly calculation. He decided to throw Camille directly to the wolves to save his own skin. He violently shoved past Chloe, practically knocking his own bride-daughter out of the way, and marched right up to me. The furious, condescending glare he had worn all evening instantly vanished. In its place, he plastered on a sickeningly sweet, affectionate smile that made my stomach turn. He opened his arms wide, projecting the image of a proud, loving father for the captivated audience. My brilliant girl, Harrison announced, his deep voice booming with manufactured warmth. I always knew you were the smartest person in this family. I always told your mother that her harsh methods were completely wrong. I saw your undeniable potential from the very beginning, Nia. I knew your culinary passion was actually a stroke of absolute corporate genius. He stepped closer, attempting to place a heavy paternal hand on my shoulder. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, masking the sharp scent of his rising panic. You have done incredibly well for yourself, he continued, his eyes darting toward the wealthy tech investors who were still standing near the dance floor. You have built a remarkable foundation with Lumiere Hospitality. But running a $300 million empire is a massive undertaking for a young woman doing it all alone. You need experienced, aggressive financial management to protect your assets from corporate sharks. You need your father. Harrison lowered his voice slightly, adopting a tone of desperate conspiratorial urgency. Let me step in as your chief financial officer, Nia. Let me handle the Lumiere accounts. I can restructure your portfolios and save this family from the financial ruin your mother caused with her reckless spending. We can rebrand the Hawthorne estate together. We can make the Adams name legendary across the entire country. We are a team, sweetheart. We always have been. He looked around the lawn, offering a confident, polished nod to the remaining VIP guests, desperately trying to salvage his shattered reputation by actively attaching himself to my hard-earned billionaire status. He was trying to rewrite 32 years of emotional neglect and financial abuse into a heartwarming story of a father guiding his highly successful daughter to the top. He firmly believed that his biological title granted him unrestricted, unconditional access to my expanding corporate treasury. He expected me to fall right into his open arms, to blindly accept his fake validation, and to eagerly hand over the keys to my entire kingdom simply because he finally decided to proudly claim me in public. I stepped back with absolute disgust, completely avoiding his outstretched arms. His hands awkwardly grasped nothing but the humid evening air. I looked at him with a level of cold, calculating disdain that made the confident smile slide right off his face. My security guard Marcus immediately shifted his stance, ready to physically intervene if my father tried to touch me again. But I did not need physical protection. I needed to deliver the final crushing blow to the patriarch who had actively sabotaged my entire existence. You want to manage my financial portfolios, Harrison? I asked, my voice carrying a sharp, dangerous edge that echoed across the silent, captivated lawn. You want to save the family from financial ruin using my corporate treasury. That is a very bold proposal, coming from a man who committed felony bank fraud against his own flesh and blood. Harrison stiffened his eyes, darting nervously toward the wealthy athletes and venture capitalists watching our every move. He opened his mouth to deny the accusation, but I did not give him the chance to spin another lie. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick, folded document. It was not a catering bill or a property deed. It was a comprehensive, highly detailed credit report and a stack of certified bank statements from 14 years ago. I held the papers up for the crowd to see. When I turned 18 years old, I worked double shifts in a sweltering commercial kitchen just to afford my basic community college tuition, I announced, ensuring every single guest heard the undeniable truth. I ate instant noodles and slept on a broken mattress because I believed our family was struggling. But you are not struggling, Harrison. You are simply maintaining a massive fraudulent lifestyle that you could not actually afford. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to look directly at the damning financial documents in my hand. You wanted to keep your elite status at the country club. You wanted to fund your failed real estate investments and lease brand new luxury vehicles to impress men who are standing in this very garden tonight. But your credit was completely destroyed. So you committed identity theft. You stole my social security number. The crowd erupted into loud, disgusted gasps. Several high society matriarchs covered their mouths in sheer horror. Identity theft within a family was a desperate, unforgivable crime in these circles. You opened 5 different platinum credit cards in my name. I continued, my voice striking him like a physical weapon. You forged my signature and racked up exactly $50,000 in high-interest debt before I even knew what a credit score was. You spent my entire financial future on expensive golf clubs, luxury dinners, and custom-tailored suits. When the accounts inevitably defaulted, you let the collection agencies hunt me down. You let them harass a struggling 18-year-old girl while you drove around Atlanta in a leased Mercedes. Harrison began to violently tremble, the heavy reality of his exposed crimes crushing his carefully constructed patriarchal facade. He held his hands up defensively, sweating profusely under the expensive estate lighting. Nia, you have to understand business, he stammered, his deep voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. It was a temporary family investment. I was going to pay every single cent of that money back to those accounts as soon as my commercial development deal closed. I was building wealth for all of us. You are completely twisting the situation to make me look like a criminal. You did not build wealth for anyone but yourself, I stated coldly, dropping the credit report directly onto his expensive leather shoes. You are a criminal, Harrison. You did not build me. You buried me in a mountain of fraudulent debt before my adult life even started. I had to fight off aggressive debt collectors while working 80-hour weeks just to repair the credit score you maliciously destroyed. I dug myself out of that financial grave completely alone. You offered me absolutely nothing but betrayal. I turned my body slightly, addressing the shocked crowd of 300 elite guests, before delivering my final, ultimate rejection. This man standing before you is not a visionary investor or a dedicated father. He is a financial parasite who fed on his own daughter to maintain his pathetic country club illusions. You have no daughter, Harrison. You have no access to my empire, and you have absolutely no place on my property. Consider yourself entirely and permanently disowned. Harrison stood frozen, utterly speechless. His jaw hung open, completely unable to formulate a single defensive sentence. He looked frantically at his elite peers, searching for a single shred of sympathy or understanding, but he found absolutely nothing. The powerful men he had spent decades desperately trying to impress were now staring at him with pure, unadulterated contempt. He was completely exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a coward. The glorious Atlanta Black excellence legacy he had worshipped his entire life was completely dead and buried under the heavy weight of his own monumental greed. He took a pathetic, stumbling step backward, his chest heaving as the crushing reality of his total social and financial annihilation finally set in permanently. He had absolutely nothing left to ever leverage. He was finally and completely defeated forever. Just as Harrison opened his mouth to attempt one last desperate defense of his ruined character, a loud, piercing noise violently shattered the heavy tension hovering over the garden. The distinct, terrifying wail of multiple police sirens echoed loudly down the estate-long gravel driveway. The flashing red and blue emergency lights illuminated the massive iron gates of the historic property. The wealthy VIP tech investors and professional athletes standing near the dance floor had quietly called the authorities during the earlier confession. The ultimate reckoning had officially arrived, and absolutely nobody in my toxic family was going to escape. Harrison stood completely paralyzed for a fraction of a second as the collective disgust of the Atlanta elite washed over his weeping wife. The man who had spent his entire adult life carefully curating an image of flawless patriarchal authority suddenly realized his fragile social empire was burning to absolute ash. Instead of standing bravely by the woman who had just humiliated herself to protect their fake legacy, Harrison made the ultimate cowardly calculation to preserve himself. He decided to throw Camille directly to the hungry wolves to save his own skin. He violently shoved past Chloe, practically knocking his own stunned daughter out of the way, and marched purposefully right up to me. The furious, highly condescending glare he had worn all evening instantly vanished without a trace. In its place, he plastered on a sickeningly sweet, heavily fabricated, affectionate smile that made my stomach physically turn in absolute revulsion. He opened his arms wide, projecting the flawless image of a deeply proud, loving father for the captivated audience watching our every single move. "My brilliant girl," Harrison announced, his deep baritone voice booming with manufactured warmth and artificial pride. "I always knew you were the smartest, most capable person in this entire family. I always told your mother that her harsh, critical methods were completely wrong. I saw your undeniable potential from the very beginning, Nia. I knew your intense culinary passion was actually a stroke of absolute corporate genius waiting to be unleashed upon the business world." He stepped much closer, confidently attempting to place a heavy, familiar paternal hand squarely on my bare shoulder. I could smell the expensive aged scotch heavily lingering on his breath, barely masking the sharp, acrid scent of his rapidly rising panic and desperation. "You have done incredibly well for yourself, my sweet daughter," he continued smoothly, his dark eyes darting strategically toward the wealthy tech investors who were still standing near the wooden dance floor. "You have single-handedly built a remarkable, highly lucrative foundation with Lumiere Hospitality. But running a $300 million global empire is a massive, highly complicated undertaking for a young woman doing it all completely alone. You need experienced, aggressive, and highly connected financial management to protect your hard-earned assets from vicious corporate sharks. You desperately need your father to protect you." Harrison lowered his voice slightly actively, adopting a tone of desperate conspiratorial urgency meant only for my ears. "Let me step in as your official chief financial officer, Nia. Let me personally handle the massive Lumiere corporate accounts. I can skillfully restructure your investment portfolios and permanently save this family from the total financial ruin your mother caused with her reckless, uncontrollable spending habits. We can beautifully rebrand the historic Hawthorne estate together. We can make the Addams family name truly legendary across the entire country, building real generational wealth. We are a perfect team, sweetheart. We always have been and we always will be." He looked proudly around the grand lawn, offering a confident, polished nod to the remaining VIP guests. He was desperately trying to salvage his shattered public reputation by actively and forcefully attaching himself to my newly discovered billionaire status. He was actively trying to rewrite 32 years of brutal emotional neglect and severe financial abuse into a heartwarming, inspirational story of a devoted father guiding his highly successful daughter to the absolute top of the corporate ladder. He firmly believed that his biological title automatically granted him unrestricted, unconditional access to my rapidly expanding corporate treasury. He fully expected me to fall right into his open arms to blindly accept his fake parental validation and to eagerly hand over the golden keys to my entire kingdom, simply because he finally decided to proudly claim me in a highly public setting. I stepped back with absolute, unadulterated disgust, completely avoiding his outstretched arms. His hands awkwardly grasped nothing but the humid, heavy evening air. I looked at him with a level of cold, calculating disdain that made the confident manufactured smile slide right off his aging face. My head of security. Marcus immediately shifted his formidable stance, visibly ready to physically intervene and neutralize the threat if my father tried to touch me again. But I did not need any physical protection from this man. I only needed to deliver the final crushing verbal blow to the toxic patriarch who had actively and maliciously sabotaged my entire existence. You genuinely want to manage my complex financial portfolios, Harrison. I asked, my voice carrying a sharp, highly dangerous edge that echoed clearly across the silent, utterly captivated lawn. You want to save the Addams family from absolute financial ruin by actively using my corporate treasury. That is a very bold, highly insulting proposal, coming directly from a man who maliciously committed felony bank fraud against his own flesh and blood. Harrison stiffened violently, his eyes darting nervously toward the wealthy professional athletes and elite venture capitalists watching our every single move with intense scrutiny. He quickly opened his mouth to angrily deny the severe accusation, but I did not give him the opportunity to spin another pathetic lie. I reached deep into my emerald silk clutch and pulled out a thick, tightly folded legal document. It was not a catering bill, a property deed, or a corporate contract. It was a comprehensive, highly detailed, officially certified credit report, neatly clipped together with a thick stack of verified bank statements from exactly 14 years ago. I held the damning papers up high for the entire elite crowd to clearly see. When I turned 18 years old, I worked grueling double shifts in a sweltering, windowless commercial kitchen just to afford my basic community college tuition, I announced, ensuring every single guest heard the undeniable, brutal truth of my struggle. I regularly ate cheap instant noodles and slept on a broken, uncomfortable mattress because I truly believed our family was heavily struggling to make ends meet. But you were not actually struggling, Harrison. You were simply maintaining a massive, highly fraudulent luxury lifestyle that you could not actually afford to sustain. I took one slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to look directly at the damning financial documents clutched tightly in my hand. You desperately wanted to keep your elite, elevated status at the prestigious country club. You wanted to heavily fund your failed commercial real estate investments and lease brand new luxury vehicles to falsely impress the very men who are standing in this garden tonight. But your personal credit was completely and utterly destroyed. So you committed malicious identity theft. You intentionally stole my social security number. The affluent crowd erupted into loud, deeply disgusted gasps. Several high society matriarchs physically covered their mouths in sheer, unadulterated horror. Identity theft within a family unit was a desperate, entirely unforgivable crime in these incredibly wealthy circles. You secretly opened 5 different platinum credit cards entirely in my name. I continued, my unwavering voice striking his fragile ego like a physical weapon. You deliberately forged my signature and recklessly racked up exactly $50,000 in crippling high-interest debt before I even knew what a credit score was. You selfishly spent my entire financial future on expensive customized golf clubs, luxury steakhouse dinners, and custom-tailored Italian suits. When the maxed-out accounts inevitably defaulted, you cowardly let the aggressive collection agencies hunt me down like a criminal. You let them ruthlessly harass a struggling 18-year-old girl while you drove around Atlanta in a leased Mercedes. Harrison began to violently tremble, the heavy, inescapable reality of his fully exposed crimes, crushing his carefully constructed patriarchal facade into absolute dust. He held his shaking hands up defensively, sweating profusely under the bright, expensive estate lighting. "Nia, you have to understand complex business." He stammered, his deep voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "It was a temporary family investment. I was going to pay every single cent of that money back to those accounts as soon as my commercial development deal officially closed. I was actively building generational wealth for all of us. You are completely twisting the situation to make me look like a common criminal." "You did not build wealth for anyone but yourself," I stated coldly. "You are a common criminal. You did not build me. You buried me in fraudulent debt before my life even started. I had to aggressively repair the credit score you destroyed. I dug myself out of that deep grave completely alone. You offered me absolutely nothing but painful betrayal." I turned my body slightly, addressing the shocked crowd of 300 elite guests before delivering my final, ultimate rejection. "This man standing before you is not a visionary investor or a dedicated father. He is a financial parasite who fed on his own daughter to maintain his pathetic country club illusions. You have no daughter, Harrison. You have no access to my empire, and you have absolutely no place on my property. Consider yourself entirely and permanently disowned." Harrison stood frozen, utterly speechless. His jaw hung open, completely unable to formulate a single defensive sentence. He looked frantically at his elite peers, searching for a single shred of sympathy or understanding, but he found absolutely nothing. The powerful men he had spent decades desperately trying to impress were now staring at him with pure, unadulterated contempt. He was completely exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a coward. The glorious Atlanta Black excellence legacy he had worshipped his entire life was completely dead and buried under the heavy weight of his own monumental greed. He took a pathetic, stumbling step backward, his chest heaving, as the crushing reality of his total social and financial annihilation finally set in permanently. He had absolutely nothing left to ever leverage. He was finally and completely defeated forever. Just as Harrison opened his mouth to attempt one last desperate defense of his ruined character, a loud, piercing noise violently shattered the heavy tension hovering over the garden. The distinct, terrifying wail of multiple police sirens echoed loudly down the long gravel driveway. The flashing red and blue emergency lights brightly illuminated the massive iron gates of the historic property. The wealthy VIP tech investors and professional athletes standing near the dance floor had quietly called the authorities during the earlier embezzlement confession. The ultimate reckoning had officially arrived, and absolutely nobody in my profoundly toxic family was ever going to escape the brutal, uncompromising justice that they so richly deserved tonight. The lead detective signaled his heavily armed officers. They moved with absolute precision, closing the distance in a matter of seconds. Two broad-shouldered officers physically grabbed Julian by his muddy, torn tuxedo jacket, forcefully hauling him upward. Julian offered absolutely no resistance, his body entirely limp. His legs gave out beneath him, making him look like a broken marionette being dragged across the manicured grass. Another officer grabbed Chloe by the arms, pulling her away from her groom. She thrashed wildly, her bridal veil tangling around the officer's heavy utility belt, but she was subdued and pushed back toward her horrified parents. Julian was bleeding from vicious scratches down his cheeks where Chloe had desperately clawed at his face. He gasped for air, his chest heaving as the officers held him upright. The lead detective did not even look at the hysterical bride. He turned his attention directly to the towering professional athlete and the wealthy tech investor who had remained standing near the dance floor. "Are these the individuals pressing formal charges for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud?" the detective asked, his voice cutting through the humid night air like a steel blade. The massive professional athlete stepped forward, his custom-tailored suit contrasting sharply with the chaotic scene. "Yes," the athlete stated, his voice rumbling with deep, uncompromising authority. "This man, Julian Adams, is our talent manager. He just publicly confessed to stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from our private investment portfolios to fund this fraudulent event. We have everything we need to press federal charges right here, right now. Take him away." The tech investor nodded in absolute agreement, holding up his sleek smartphone for the officers to see. I already sent the preliminary financial transaction logs directly to the fraud division on our way over. The digital evidence of his massive calculated theft is completely undeniable. The lead detective turned back to Julian, whose face had drained of whatever color remained. Julian Adams, the detective announced, pulling a pair of heavy silver handcuffs from his utility belt. You are officially under arrest for multiple counts of felony wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking tightly around Julian's wrists echoed loudly across the silent estate. The sound completely shattered whatever remained of his arrogant high-class tech bro persona entirely. Julian completely collapsed inward. He fell to his knees on the wet grass, the heavy handcuffs pulling his arms awkwardly behind his back. He began to cry loudly, sobbing with the unrestrained, pathetic intensity of a terrified child. Huge, ugly tears streamed down his scratched face, mixing with the dark mud and spilled champagne staining his collar. Please, Julian wailed desperately, looking toward the VIP investors. Please do not do this to me. I will pay you back. I will work for free forever. Please, you are ruining my entire life. You have the right to remain silent, the detective stated coldly, completely ignoring Julian's pathetic begging as he began reading the Miranda rights. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The wealthy crowd watched in absolute fascinated horror as the sobbing groom was roughly pulled back to his feet by the officers. Everyone assumed the dramatic spectacle had finally reached its ultimate conclusion. They believed the arrest of the fraudulent groom was the grand finale of this disastrous Atlanta society wedding. But the police officers did not turn back toward the long gravel driveway. They did not immediately march Julian to the waiting squad cars. Instead, the lead detective turned his cold, calculating gaze directly toward Harrison. My father stood completely frozen near the white folding chairs, his breathing shallow and erratic. He watched the detective approach with wide, terrified eyes. Harrison desperately tried to project his usual aura of country club superiority, straightening his spine and lifting his chin, but his entire body was visibly trembling under the bright estate lighting. Harrison Vance, the detective asked, his tone demanding immediate confirmation. Harrison swallowed, his throat bobbing nervously. Yes, he replied, his deep voice shaking uncontrollably. I am Harrison Vance. What is the meaning of this? This you have already arrested the man responsible for the financial crimes. My family has absolutely nothing to do with his illegal corporate activities. From the shadows, near the Grand Mansion entrance, a sharply dressed woman in a pristine navy business suit stepped forward. It was my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless legal shark I had hired months ago to meticulously build an ironclad case against my father. She carried a thick leather-bound briefcase and walked directly to the detective's side, handing him a freshly signed official court document. Actually, Mr. Vance, my attorney stated, her voice carrying across the lawn with lethal precision, your son-in-law is not the only criminal standing on this property tonight. We have spent the last 3 months working closely with federal investigators tracking the fraudulent credit accounts you maliciously opened using my client's stolen identity. Harrison gasped loudly, stumbling backward, as if he had been physically struck. He looked frantically at the detective, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of innocence. This is a massive misunderstanding. Harrison pleaded, his arrogant facade completely dissolving into pure desperation. I am a highly respected commercial real estate developer in this city. I am a prominent member of the elite country club. You cannot possibly arrest me based on the vindictive lies of a bitter, ungrateful daughter. The detective glanced down at the official arrest warrant in his hands, completely unmoved by my father's desperate attempt to pull rank. Harrison Vance, the detective, announced loudly, his voice booming over the shocked whispers of the crowd, you are officially under arrest for felony identity theft, aggravated bank fraud, and severe financial exploitation. Harrison let out a strangled, pathetic cry as 2 police officers moved swiftly behind him. He tried to pull his arms away, desperately resisting the officers, but they easily overpowered him. The second set of heavy silver handcuffs clicked loudly into place, locking my father's wrists firmly behind his back. The man who had spent his entire life bullying me, belittling my passions, and stealing my financial future was now standing in the mud, humiliated and restrained, like a common street criminal. "I am your father!" Harrison screamed wildly, twisting his head to look directly at me as the officers held him tight. "Nia, tell them to stop this right now. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a federal prison. I gave you life." I looked at him with profound, icy emptiness. "You didn't build me, Harrison," I replied coldly, ensuring the entire crowd heard my final judgment. "You buried me in debt before my life even started. I dug myself out. You are a fraud and a criminal." As Harrison and Julian were forcefully marched across the ruined grass toward the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting police cruisers, Camille completely lost whatever remained of her fragile sanity. She threw herself onto the damp ground, clutching her expensive pearl necklace as she let out a series of piercing theatrical wails that echoed painfully against the historic brick walls of the estate. "My husband is an innocent man!" Camille shrieked at the top of her lungs, her perfectly styled hair falling in wild, chaotic strands across her tear-stained face. She reached out desperately toward the retreating officers, her acrylic nails digging into the muddy turf, scraping against the damp earth. "You are destroying a prominent Atlanta family. You are ruining our immaculate legacy." But absolutely nobody stepped forward to offer her a single ounce of comfort. The 300 elite guests, the very people Camille had spent her entire life desperately trying to impress, were now treating her like a highly contagious disease. Socialites in glittering designer gowns and wealthy businessmen in custom suits had all pulled out their expensive smartphones. They were actively recording every single second of the spectacular downfall. Camera flashes erupted continuously across the lawn, illuminating the sheer devastation of the family. The majestic, highly anticipated Black Excellence wedding had officially been transformed into an active, heavily documented crime scene. The beautiful floral arrangements were trampled into the mud. The premium champagne sat waiting to be poured down the drainage grates. The illusion of their generational wealth was completely annihilated forever. Chloe was left standing completely alone in the center of the ruined lawn. Her custom wedding dress was torn, soaked with dirty water, and stained with Julian's blood. She shivered violently in the humid night air, utterly humiliated and stripped of every single thing she valued. She looked at her arrested groom, her disgraced parents, and the recording guests. With a guttural scream of pure, unfiltered wrath, she turned her manic attention to the only pristine thing left on the entire property. The towering, six-tier, $20,000 wedding cake sat perfectly intact on a draped table nearby. She charged blindly at the massive dessert, absolutely determined to violently ruin the food if she could not have her perfect wedding. Chloe stood trembling violently in the center of the devastated lawn, entirely stripped of her fraudulent groom and her elite social standing. The humid Atlanta air clung to her ruined Vera Wang gown, which was now stained with dark mud and Julian's blood. Her eyes darted wildly around the historic garden, landing on the only pristine, untouched element remaining on my property. Positioned under a glowing spotlight on an elevated draped table, sat her magnificent custom-designed six-tier wedding cake. It was a towering masterpiece of culinary art, meticulously decorated with cascading sugar-spun orchids and intricate 24-karat gold leaf detailing. Chloe had bragged to every single person in our family that the massive dessert cost $20,000, an ultimate symbol of her supposed limitless wealth. Now completely consumed by an uncontrollable feral rage, she viewed that towering structure as her absolute final weapon. If her perfect Black Excellence wedding was entirely destroyed, she was going to ensure that my precious catering inventory went down with it. With a guttural, terrifying scream tearing from her throat, Chloe hitched up the heavy, waterlogged skirts of her designer gown and charged blindly toward the elevated display table. Her expensive satin heels dug deeply into the wet grass as she sprinted, her arms extended like a chaotic, unhinged battering ram. The remaining elite guests gasped, stepping frantically out of her destructive path. I stood perfectly still, watching her manic descent with absolute unwavering calm. Chloe hit the draped table with the full aggressive force of her entire body. She shoved her hands forcefully against the bottom tier of the towering dessert, violently pushing the entire structure backward. For a split second, the massive $20,000 cake seemed to hang suspended in the humid evening air. Then gravity took total control. The 6 tiers crashed down onto the stone patio with a spectacular deafening thud. Huge chunks of white fondant decorative sugar flowers and thick layers of supposed vanilla buttercream exploded violently across the ground. The impact sent heavy, messy splatters of icing flying directly onto Chloe's already ruined dress and expensive shoes. She stood over the shattered remains of her ultimate status symbol, breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you can take everything away from me and just walk away?" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent estate. She kicked a massive chunk of the ruined cake, sending white frosting flying across the patio. "You think you can cancel my wedding and humiliate me in front of the entire city? Well, if I do not get a wedding, you do not get to keep your precious catering inventory. I will destroy every single thing you touch, Nia. I will personally ruin your pathetic culinary reputation." I looked down at the massive, catastrophic mess of white fondant and shattered sugar orchids spread across the stone patio, and then I looked back up at my screaming, unhinged sister. Instead of displaying any anger or frustration at the supposed destruction of a $20,000 culinary masterpiece, I simply tilted my head back and let out a genuine, hearty laugh. My laughter rang out clearly across the tense, silent garden, completely confusing the remaining elite guests and infuriating my sister even further. Chloe stared at me, her hands balled into tight fists, absolutely bewildered by my total lack of panic. I slowly raised my right hand, catching the immediate attention of my elite catering staff waiting by the kitchen doors. I gave them a sharp, deliberate signal. 2 professional waiters immediately emerged from the kitchen, carefully wheeling out a heavy stainless steel utility cart. Sitting securely in the center of the metal cart was a breathtaking, flawless, completely intact 6-tier wedding cake. It was the exact perfect replica of the one Chloe had just violently shoved onto the ground, complete with the cascading sugar-spun orchids and the intricate gold leaf detailing. A collective of highly confused murmur rippled rapidly through the crowd of high society onlookers. Chloe staggered backward, her jaw dropping open as she stared at the pristine cake rolling smoothly onto the lawn, then looked down at the shattered mess currently covering her satin shoes. "What is going on?" Chloe demanded, her voice shaking with raw confusion. "How do you have 2 cakes?" I took a slow, measured step toward her, my emerald green silk dress gliding over the grass. "You honestly thought I would trust a $20,000 masterpiece to a man whose credit cards were actively bouncing all over the city?" I asked, my tone dripping with cold, calculated corporate logic. Julian's primary talent agency card declined at the bakery exactly 2 days ago. His secondary accounts were already flagged for severe insufficient funds. The bakery manager, Lumiere Hospitality, in an absolute panic, terrified that they were going to lose weeks of specialized labor and expensive imported ingredients. I paused, ensuring every single guest heard my next words with crystal clear precision. "That cake you just violently smashed onto the patio, Chloe, was nothing but a cheap hollow styrofoam display prop covered in heavy layers of spackle and fake commercial icing. I bought the real cake myself, using corporate funds, because my hardworking culinary staff actually deserves to be paid for their incredible artistry. You just threw a massive, unhinged temper tantrum over a towering stack of industrial plastic." The utter humiliation that instantly washed over Chloe's face was an absolute masterpiece. She looked down at her hands, which were heavily coated in cheap, sticky commercial spackle, and then looked at her ruined designer dress, now stained with fake, inedible icing. She had desperately tried to destroy my valuable property to inflict maximum financial pain. But she had only succeeded in making herself look like an absolute, undeniable fool in front of the most powerful politicians and real estate developers in Atlanta. She had actively vandalized a worthless piece of plastic, while the real $20,000 investment sat safely secured under my direct protection. "You set me up!" Chloe whispered, her voice cracking as the full weight of her extreme public embarrassment finally crushed her entirely. "I did not set you up, Chloe," I replied with absolute icy finality. "I simply protected my corporate assets from your fraudulent groom. You set yourself up the very moment you decided to prioritize fake social status over genuine human decency." Suddenly, the crowd parted slightly as a familiar figure walked calmly onto the center of the lawn. It was our Aunt Denise. She had spent the entire chaotic evening quietly sipping premium champagne at a corner table, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular downfall of her incredibly toxic relatives. Aunt Denise wore a sharp-tailored navy blue pantsuit, projecting the exact kind of quiet, authentic confidence that my parents had spent their entire lives desperately faking. She calmly walked over to the spot where Chloe had aggressively confronted me hours earlier. Aunt Denise bent down gracefully and picked up the black waiter's apron that Chloe had viciously thrown at my chest. She shook the dirt off the dark fabric, her expression radiating pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Aunt Denise approached Chloe, who was currently shivering in her wet, ruined, spackle-covered wedding gown. Without a single ounce of hesitation or sympathy, Aunt Denise roughly draped the black uniform apron directly over Chloe's shoulders, tying the strings tightly around her neck. "You are going to need this, sweetie," Aunt Denise stated, her voice carrying a sharp, unapologetic reality check that echoed across the quiet garden. "Since your fake millionaire husband is currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser and your parents are heading to a federal holding cell for massive bank fraud, your luxury lifestyle is officially terminated. Minimum wage is a very tough adjustment, but you better get used to serving tables. I hear the local diner down the street is currently hiring night shift hostesses." Chloe let out a devastated, broken sob. The heavy dark fabric of the waiter's apron hung loosely over her ruined designer gown, serving as the ultimate, inescapable symbol of her total social destruction. Her legs finally gave out completely. She collapsed heavily to her knees, burying her face deep into the messy, scattered chunks of fake styrofoam frosting, weeping uncontrollably into the dirty patio stones. Just as she surrendered entirely to her profound humiliation, a sudden blinding explosion of bright white light violently illuminated the dark estate gates. Flashes erupted continuously, completely blinding the remaining guests. The local news media, prominent Atlanta society bloggers, and relentless tabloid journalists had officially arrived in full force, completely surrounding the iron perimeter. They raised their heavy cameras high, hungrily capturing every single devastating angle of the shattered, disgraced bride weeping in the fake plastic cake. The blinding flashes of cameras pierced through the dark Atlanta night like lightning strikes. The heavy iron gates of the Hawthorne estate had been pushed open by the departing police cruisers, leaving a wide gap that the local news media and prominent society bloggers instantly exploited. The paparazzi swarmed the entrance like ravenous wolves catching the scent of blood. Microphones were thrust through the gaps in the wrought iron fencing. Camera operators climbed onto the stone pillars to get a better angle of the absolute devastation unfolding on the manicured lawn. The story of a high-profile talent manager and a prominent real estate developer being hauled away in handcuffs from a luxury black excellence wedding was the ultimate journalistic goldmine. Chloe saw the flashing camera lights and immediately recognized a desperate opportunity to salvage her completely ruined reputation. She scrambled up from the dirty patio stones, completely ignoring the thick chunks of fake styrofoam frosting clinging to her torn Vera Wang wedding gown. Her bare feet slapped wetly against the grass as she sprinted furiously toward the heavy iron gates. She pushed her way past the remaining bewildered guests, her face twisted into a mask of theatrical manufactured agony. She grabbed the iron bars of the gate, weeping loudly for the cameras. She threw her head back, ensuring the bright media lights caught the tragic, tear-stained ruin of her flawless bridal makeup. She positioned herself as the ultimate victim of a cruel, unprovoked attack. "Please, you have to tell the world what happened here tonight," Chloe shrieked into the cluster of extended microphones. "My own sister destroyed my life. She is a jealous, bitter, vindictive monster. She orchestrated this entire nightmare because she has always hated me for being the beautiful, successful daughter. She framed my husband. She framed my poor father. She hacked into corporate databases and paid off the police just to ruin my perfect wedding day. She has always been obsessed with tearing down my happiness because she is nothing but a miserable, lonely failure. The reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices creating a chaotic, deafening roar. They asked Chloe about the embezzlement charges. They asked about the police dragging her father away. Chloe ignored their specific factual questions and simply cried louder desperately, trying to spin a fabricated narrative of a highly successful bride being viciously victimized by a jealous, dark-skinned outcast sister. She pointed a trembling, icing-covered finger back toward the estate lawn where I was standing calmly next to Aunt Denise. "Look at her standing there," Chloe wailed dramatically, turning her tearful face back to the flashing cameras. "She wants to steal my spotlight. She wants to be the center of attention. She is a fraud who hates to see another black woman succeeding. Write that down. Tell everyone that Nia Adams is a jealous, home-wrecking saboteur." The hungry journalists eagerly recorded her every word, their camera lenses zooming in on the dark mud and fake vanilla spackles staining her designer dress. Chloe leaned closer to the iron bars, gripping them so tightly her knuckles turned white. She actively played into every single negative stereotype she could weaponize, desperately hoping the court of public opinion would validate her victimhood. She sobbed about how she had tried for years to include me in her elite social circles, painting herself as the benevolent, forgiving sibling who had repeatedly extended olive branches, only to have them slapped away. The performance was a masterful display of sheer, unadulterated delusion. She truly believed that if she cried loud enough, the media would automatically side with the pretty light-skinned bride over the cold, calculating sister. I watched her pathetic, desperate performance from the patio with absolute, unwavering calm. I did not yell back at her. I did not rush forward to angrily dispute her ridiculous claims. I simply smoothed the front of my unbranded emerald green silk dress and turned to the imposing head of my private security detail. "Marcus," I instructed softly but clearly. "Open the gates entirely. Let the press onto the outer driveway. It is time to provide an official corporate statement." "Right away, boss," Marcus replied instantly. He signaled his security team. The heavy iron gates swung wide open, allowing the eager mob of reporters, bloggers, and camera operators to flood onto the expansive gravel driveway. They rushed forward like a tidal wave, but Marcus and his highly trained guards formed an impenetrable human wall, stopping them exactly 10 feet away from where I stood. I walked slowly and deliberately down the grand stone steps of the mansion. I was flanked securely by Marcus on my right and Aunt Denise on my left. Aunt Denise held a glass of premium champagne, looking completely serene and deeply entertained by the unfolding spectacle. I did not look unhinged. I did not look frantic. I exuded pure, concentrated corporate power. I stopped right in front of the wall of flashing cameras. Chloe was still standing off to the side, weeping loudly and trying to pull the reporter's focus back to her ruined dress. But the moment I stepped into the bright glare of the media lights, the entire atmosphere shifted. The reporters instantly stopped shouting over each other. They lowered their microphones, slightly captivated by the absolute commanding silence I demanded simply by standing there. "Good evening," I said, my voice smooth, steady, and projecting flawless authority without needing to raise the volume. "My name is Nia. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Lumiere Hospitality. I am also the sole legal owner of the Hawthorne estate." A collective gasp of genuine shock rippled through the assembled press. The society bloggers exchanged wide-eyed, stunned glances. They had all been fed the narrative that Julian and Chloe had rented this historic property. Hearing that the anonymous culinary billionaire who owned the entire estate was standing right in front of them completely derailed Chloe's fabricated victim story. "I am issuing a brief official statement regarding the events that transpired on my property tonight." I continued, ensuring every single camera captured my calm, professional demeanor. Lumiere Hospitality maintains a strict policy of absolute financial integrity. We do not tolerate fraud, corporate embezzlement, or identity theft under any circumstances. Earlier this evening, it was brought to my attention that the groom, Julian Adams, illegally misappropriated funds from his talent agency clients to finance this private event. Furthermore, Harrison Vance was apprehended for severe long-standing bank fraud. I paused, letting the heavy reality of my words sink into the microphones recording my statement. Because these financial crimes conflict directly with the core values of my corporation, I exercised my legal right as the property owner to immediately terminate the event and evict the perpetrators. I fully cooperated with the local authorities to ensure justice was served to the defrauded investors. Lumiere Hospitality will always prioritize ethical business practices over superficial social displays. Thank you. The response from the press was instantaneous and absolutely seismic. The media completely stopped paying any attention to Chloe. The sobbing, frantic bride in the dirty dress instantly became invisible to them. They turned their backs on her, shifting their heavy cameras and microphones toward me. The narrative flipped on a dime. They were no longer interested in a ruined wedding. They were actively witnessing the public emergence of a powerful self-made dark-skinned female billionaire, taking absolute control of a financial scandal. Madam CEO, a prominent financial reporter, shouted from the front of the pack, holding his digital recorder high. Can you confirm the total valuation of Lumiere Hospitality? Is it true you built this empire entirely from the ground up without any family financial backing? Another reporter pushed forward. Nia, how does it feel to single-handedly expose a massive embezzlement ring right here in the heart of Atlanta high society? Are you planning to expand your corporate acquisitions this year? Chloe stood frozen just a few feet away. Her mouth hung open in sheer disbelief. She had spent her entire life demanding to be the center of attention. She had ruthlessly bullied me, stolen from me, and publicly humiliated me just to maintain her elite spotlight. And now, in the very moment she tried to destroy my reputation, the world was ignoring her to hang on to my every word. She was irrelevant. The reporters bumped into her, shoving past her ruined Vera Wang gown just to get a better camera angle of my face. I answered their rapid-fire questions with practiced corporate grace. I highlighted my company's strict commitment to ethical sourcing and community development. I detailed how my grandmother's authentic generational recipes had served as the foundation for my culinary empire, sharply contrasting my honest hard work with the fraudulent criminal shortcuts taken by the men who had just been arrested. I controlled the entire narrative with effortless precision. I painted a picture of true Black excellence, one built on actual labor, absolute integrity, and immense self-respect, rather than rented dresses and stolen investment funds. Chloe finally realized she had completely lost. The battle was over. The media was never going to side with a fraud. She let out a quiet, defeated whimper, wrapping her arms around herself as the cool night air chilled her damp skin. She slowly backed away into the shadows of the garden, dragging her dirty, heavy train behind her. No one watched her leave. No one asked where she was going. Her social annihilation was absolute and utterly permanent. Suddenly, a tall, sharply dressed man deliberately pushed his way through the dense crowd of scrambling reporters. He bypassed the local bloggers entirely, walking directly up to the security line Marcus was firmly holding. He reached into his tailored breast pocket and pulled out a thick embossed business card. "I am the executive producer for a major national television network," he announced, his eyes locked onto mine with intense, undisguised admiration. "The entire country needs to hear this incredible story. We want to offer you a prime-time exclusive interview, and we are heavily interested in greenlighting a premiere docuseries chronicling your massive culinary empire." I looked back at the dark, empty space where my sister had just been standing. She was completely gone, completely invisible. I turned back to the eager producer, reached out and accepted the card. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The spectacular, highly documented downfall of the Addams family was swift, merciless, and absolutely absolute. Julian Addams did not get his massive corporate bailout. He did not sign a master franchise contract with Lumiere Hospitality. Instead, he signed a federal plea deal. He is currently serving a mandatory 10-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary for massive wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The wealthy athletes and tech investors he defrauded aggressively stripped his talent agency down to its bare, bankrupt studs, liquidating every single asset he owned to recover their stolen portfolios. His flashy, arrogant tech bro persona was entirely annihilated, replaced by a drab prison uniform and a heavily regulated commissary account. Harrison's fate was equally devastating. The man who had spent decades meticulously curating an image of untouchable patriarchal power and black excellence was utterly destroyed by his own uncontrollable greed. Faced with a mountain of undeniable certified evidence regarding the severe identity theft and bank fraud he committed in my name, Harrison also took a desperate plea deal to avoid spending his twilight years behind federal bars. He is currently serving a strict, heavily monitored 5-year sentence under permanent house arrest. He wears a bulky, restrictive GPS ankle monitor that physically prevents him from ever stepping foot on a prestigious golf course or dining at a luxury steakhouse again. His beloved country club membership was not only revoked, but his name was officially blacklisted across the entire Atlanta elite social circuit. He is a disgraced, isolated prisoner in his own rapidly decaying life. Because Harrison's fraudulent accounts were aggressively seized and Julian's embezzlement funds were legally reclaimed by the federal government, Camille and Chloe lost absolutely everything. Their luxury vehicles were abruptly repossessed in the middle of the night. Their expansive, heavily mortgaged suburban home was forcefully foreclosed upon by the bank. The two women who had spent their entire lives treating me like worthless kitchen help were unceremoniously evicted and forced to downsize into a cramped, highly outdated 2-bedroom apartment in a decidedly unglamorous neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Chloe, completely stripped of her wealthy fiancé, her rented designer gowns, and her fake socialite status, had absolutely no choice but to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of the working class. She is now forced to work 40 hours a week as a front-door hostess at a mid-tier, incredibly average chain restaurant. She spends her evenings handing out sticky plastic menus and seating large, noisy families. She wears a cheap, highly uncomfortable polyester uniform that requires her to wear a black apron every single day. The sheer delicious irony of her new reality is not lost on anyone who witnessed her spectacular meltdown at the historic Hawthorne estate. Her vanity was completely stripped away, leaving behind a miserable, deeply humbled woman desperately trying to survive on minimum wage tips. Meanwhile, my life and my corporate empire skyrocketed to unprecedented heights. The viral, highly publicized media coverage of the disastrous wedding reception did not damage my reputation in the slightest. In fact, it propelled Lumiere hospitality into the national spotlight. The elite business world was absolutely captivated by the story of a dark-skinned, natural-haired woman who had secretly built a $300 million culinary empire and then ruthlessly exposed a massive fraud ring in the middle of a high-society event. I was featured on the glossy cover of Forbes magazine, recognized not just for my immense self-made wealth, but for my fierce authenticity, my unwavering integrity, and my absolute resilience in the face of deep toxic family betrayal. My business expanded aggressively, securing lucrative corporate contracts across the country. I launched a new philanthropic foundation specifically designed to provide full culinary scholarships to young, ambitious Black women who are actively discouraged by their own families from pursuing their non-traditional passions. I used my power and my platform to actively dismantle the toxic, superficial standards of the very elite circles my family had so desperately tried to impress. Thanksgiving arrived, marking exactly 1 year since I had officially cut the toxic roots of my bloodline. I did not spend the holiday sitting in a dark, unlit corner. I celebrated Thanksgiving in the grand historic dining room of the Hawthorne estate. The massive mahogany table was beautifully decorated with vibrant autumnal centerpieces and lit by warm, flickering candles. The room echoed with genuine, heartfelt laughter and the joyous, unburdened sounds of real, unconditional love. The table was filled entirely with my chosen family. Aunt Denise sat to my right, looking radiant and completely at peace. The rest of the seats were filled by my incredibly loyal friends, my brilliant corporate executives, and the key dedicated staff members who had helped me build Lumiere Hospitality from the ground up. There was absolutely no toxicity. There was no gaslighting. There was no desperate need to project a fake superficial image of perfection. We were simply ourselves celebrating our genuine success and our profound, unbreakable bonds. As the lavish multi-course dinner concluded, I slowly stood up at the head of the table. I smoothed the skirt of my elegant custom-designed dress and raised my crystal glass. It was filled to the brim with the exact same premium, highly expensive champagne that Chloe had furiously tried to make me pay for all those months ago. The golden liquid sparkled brightly under the warm light of the grand chandelier. I looked around the table at the people who truly valued me, the people who saw my worth long before I became a billionaire CEO. I raised my glass higher, offering a final, deeply empowering toast to the incredible journey that had brought me to this exact perfect moment. To building your own tables when they refuse to give you a seat. I announced, my voice steady, warm, and resonating with absolute unshakable power. To protecting your peace, honoring your authentic truth, and recognizing that sometimes violently cutting out a deeply toxic bloodline is the ultimate, most essential recipe for genuine, lasting success. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the premium champagne, savoring the crisp, expensive taste of absolute, uncompromising victory. My life was completely, entirely my own, and it had never ever tasted so incredibly sweet. If you have ever had to make the incredibly difficult, painful decision to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and build your own legacy, I want you to know that you are absolutely not alone. It takes immense, profound courage to walk away from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But your true worth is never ever defined by their inability to see it. Share your own stories of resilience, triumph, and chosen family in the comments below. Let us actively build a community that celebrates authentic success and healthy, unwavering boundaries. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, you are the sole author of your own incredible story. Never let anyone else hold the pen.